What's up, guys? We're back with another heavy-minded podcast. I got my buddy Justin here. I've known him for a little bit. We used to work together, and he actually left a few months back. September.
Yeah.
I felt like it was longer than that.
Struggle is long.
Yeah.
It's the arduous march, like North Korea.
It really is. But you've been dealing with like a lot of ups and downs after leaving Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the ups are like a lot more interesting than the downs are. And it seems like you got like a really different and almost like, well, I can't control it, but I'm just going with it because fuck it at this point type of approach to it that I like.
Yeah, it's an interesting one.
It's definitely new, would you say? Newer?
Yeah, it's just a part of a conscious effort to live more outwardly the opinions that I've had inwardly for a long time about things,
Mm-hmm.
I suppose. Yeah, I don't necessarily know what's going to happen in a couple weeks from now. Good or bad, I just, and it's not that I don't care, it's just that I need to care less and be less worried about the what ifs.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I have a lot of if this thing that going on in my mind right now. So I thought I was going to get a job that I basically blew off a month. Assuming that I was going to get the job, I blew off a month not even applying for new work.
Mm-hmm.
And then that failed, which is rare for me too because I don't put all my eggs in one basket, typically. So that fell through. I'm like, yeah, you know what? My roommate made a good suggestion, maybe file for unemployment. So I got that. I did that, which I've done one other time before.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a bit prideful in that because I don't want to be on those assistive systems. But I also know they're there for a reason, and I feel less guilty knowing that I've paid into it. Like a ridiculous amount, and I'm only going to get like $5,000 out of it.
Mm-hmm.
The truth, in totality, unless I get like some sort of renewal.
Yeah.
So
well, if you get accepted, I
got accepted. Like the thing is,
I try to get on that shit 3 fucking times, dude. When I was 18, 19, and 20, when I was living at my apartment making under wage, I mean it was under the table.
That's why.
But then I lost my hours. Then I was legitimately making under wage. I tried to apply when I was 18, when I was 19, when I was 20, and they rejected me all 3 times, and I literally fit the fucking mold.
But it's also the amount of which you've also paid into the system. So it's kind of like Social Security as well. You're only going to receive a certain amount of that money back. It scales with the amount of money that you've put in.
Mm.
For me, since this is the first time in 7 years, and actually the first time in Florida period that I've applied for Social Security, I was able to get the full amount. But the full amount is a joke. It's $275 per week. Now,
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, the other time I did it.
So it's dependent upon your own dependence.
Yeah, well, so that's okay. So for me, it's like 50% of my pay, or a little bit less than what I normally would make. And so just my rent alone is going to eat up 50% of that unemployment benefit. So I really more so think, as politicians always tell you like to think of the children and all that kind of crap, classic bait and switch lies.
Mm-hmm.
I really think it's a system designed to be paid into that you really can't receive benefits of. Kind of like the way Social Security is going.
Mm-hmm.
But they say, oh no, we don't want you just to live off the system. Well, I wouldn't live off of the system. All you have to do is put a hard line date of you get 3 months of benefits or 6 months of benefits or 1 year of benefits. And after that, you get nothing else.
That's my cat.
So I really don't buy that argument at all. But if you also lost your job because of coronavirus and you can prove it, like you're a restaurant worker and the store was shut down or whatever, the federal government stepping in and matching that almost 100%. So there are people that are actually making more money not working than they were working their restaurant jobs.
Yeah.
So there's that going on. So it's allowed me to hold my breath a little bit. Plus I have some money in the stock market and some money in savings. So I can hold my breath for a little while to sort of choose what I want to do or hold my breath if something more favorable comes along.
Mm-hmm.
Like the robotics and mechatronics program from Amazon that I applied to. we'll see where that goes. And I got an email from them the other day, just letting me know that they're still considering me, but it's a long waiting line, and it's a relatively new program, so they're trying to, with all the warehouses that they're building, they're trying to get their heads on straight.
I hear it's a very long waiting line for everything.
Yeah, for Amazon.
Like most people give up and try to go into a different venture, and then they go back.
Well, knowing me, that's going to be my problem. I'll receive this job offer like a month into me going
doing
to school,
something else. Yeah,
and I'll be like, oh crap.
That's how life works.
Yeah, well, and it always works that way for me. It's like I went from being worried to having 3 job offers and turning 2 of them down. And that other one that I accepted, it ended up being a bad decision, which I had a feeling it was, but there were certain circumstances that happened where I couldn't also accept the other ones. So, again, a lot of if, this, then that. So, depending upon my school schedule and the things that are going on with school, if I'm going to school 3 days a week or 4 days a week, full-time student is 12 credit hours, and each class is 3 credit hours, so that's 4 classes per week.
You don't want to do that.
Oh man, for like database administration or systems information,
yeah,
I can totally do that.
But the school, that commitment again, just to go through the whole process. How long would you have to go in for?
Well, this one's just going to be an associate's degree.
Okay, so that's not too long. That's only like a year, 2 years.
2 years for associates, bachelors are 4.
Bachelors are 4. So what the fuck is a master's?
It's either 6 or 8.
See, I
think it's 6 is master's and 8 is doctorate.
I was under the impression that master's was 4 and a bachelor's was 2. Mm-hmm. So that's okay. If that's 6 years, that's horrible. Yeah. That's horrible.
So depending upon what I
that brings up like a really interesting idea, because it is 6 years to get a master's. Why hasn't there? Well, there obviously has been, but obviously the price of tuition is exponentially high, mm-hmm. and extremely expensive. And they're gonna say that it's gonna require 6 years of schooling. They're kind of giving you a contract, like a phone bill, and saying you have to pay X amount. They're really just saying you're going to have to pay X amount to get your master's degree. So they're kind of got a system where, because there is the demand, they can price it to be whatever it is, regardless of the quality of education.
Well, that all goes back to like capital controls and anti-competitive behavior from the government. So whenever it comes to me, and we'll talk about that in a minute, because it is a really frustrating process. So depending upon my school schedule, will let me know the types of hours that I can work. Mm-hmm. But even if my hours are conducive to schooling, I still have to apply for the loan.
You could be a cam girl.
Yeah, subscribe to my OnlyFans.
There's someone out there who would pay a lot of money.
There's a lot of weirdos.
You just gotta find that person who's got too much money and no time on their hands.
Yeah, a lot of weirdos for a lot of things. So this could all still just come down to funding. I'm going through this entire process like a full simulation, as if it is going to happen, but it still may not happen, because it's going to be determined on if I can find a job that actually pays enough for me to go to school still, because I might have to do some sort of reduced hours, and or if I qualify for the student loan. So if I don't qualify for a student loan, I won't be able to go to school, period. So it'll be and this is my 4th time trying to go back to school. So we'll see where that goes. There's always weird things that always
transitionary period.
Now when it comes to university and education and them charging, I always bring up a good example, because it reminds me of insurance and cost covering over multiple thousands or millions of people, or cost distortion rather. So I worked with a guy who lived in Alabama, and he told me a story of Alabama was one of the last states to hold out on mandating car insurance. And the lobbyists, like State Farm or whomever, they were lobbying the state government to create a law to require it, and it passed, and everyone's insurance precipitously went up over the course of several years, because it was not mandated, and that was an anti-competitive system. And a lot of your universities, public and private, are like that. You on the public university level, which is really where my concern is, because if somebody wants to charge $1 million a year to go to school and it's a private university, so be it. We have people that are complaining about capitalism and making money and all that, but and socialism too. But it's really, these universities are anti-competitive in nature, and
It's not like they're competitive pricing.
and it's ridiculous. And
that would be awesome, wouldn't it? Though,
well,
like,
it would
hold on,
be.
UB gave me like $3,000 just for one semester. All right, I'll talk to my boss.
Well, and wouldn't it be nice if you had some sort of
280.
bargaining power where the value of your admission was taken seriously? But really, you're just a quasi-profit mechanism for the state. And go ahead.
I heard a solution to this that I think is probably more than likely the future. Your job is going to be like a profile on a social media website, and you're going to be rated based on your interactions with other people.
Social credit systems.
Yeah, it'll be social credit systems.
Yeah.
So I could totally see a reality where that exists, where literally you rate your actual quality experience, and it's based upon the bill is adjustable based on the experience as well as the money put through.
Well, a lot of that was an attempt at, with Common Core too. So with Common Core, the federal government wanted to. Oh, by the way, people complain about student loans and mortgages and all this kind of stuff. The federal government's the largest organization there is, and people want to complain about capitalism when it's not capitalism at all. Now, I have my own concerns with extreme capitalism because extreme capitalism will make money regardless, or will understand the value of a transaction with or without money. So, like, murder this person, I'll give you a house. That would be an extreme capitalist transaction. Not even just for money, I'll just give you the house. So they're the primary underwriters and insurers of mortgages in the entire United States. Basically, companies like mortgage companies like Rocket Mortgage and whatnot, they are really just private collectors and like mortgage originators, if I remember the terms correctly. And then the government comes and just buys out the crap loans from them. So these private companies have very little to no risk. They hold on to the liabilities for as short as time as possible. And then so the same thing with medical. You have Medicare, you have Medicaid, you have WIC, you have TANF, you have SNAP, you have the VA system. And people want to complain about more so, and there's two more so prevailing extreme thoughts on that, and less well-rounded thoughts, where it's like people are extreme, but it's the government's fault, and then the other side is, it's the private corporation's fault. I think somewhere the fault lies in between. So like I said, you have those mortgage systems where private companies exist just to make a percentage of profit and then resell the mortgage for a percentage of profit, and that's it. Well, we have the same thing with government run healthcare as well as we know it now. It's like people don't understand. If we're complaining about the VA as a whole right now, and that's an argument from both sides. Like the VA needs to be overhauled, as the cliche or the term goes. But
Virginia,
there's a disagreement. There's a disagreement as to the methods of overhaul. But my concern is, okay, this is essentially the ideological model that most progressives or socialists or big government thinking individuals or big pro-government thinking individuals want. But it's a terrible system because it takes private capital, it seizes it, and relies on no growth. So what are you left with?
It's a dead end.
Waiting lines.
Yeah.
To some degree, and I've known people for minor things like I broke my wrist and I go to the VA, no problem. I could also pay $300 and do it right now. I paid a couple $100 for my MRI and got it done that day. I scheduled it out a couple days in advance, but I got it done essentially within a week of scheduling. And there are some places where you wait because there's no competition in the market, and the government now operates on a budget. Well, they can only afford.
You're talking about like free healthcare in most countries.
Yeah. So now the government can only afford to purchase one MRI machine every 10 years instead of a private company that is relying on a competitive growth model who's willing to do risk assessments to say, we can do that twice as good or twice as well as what the public version can. So there's market incentive and there's competition there that also drives down prices.
I heard Canada does it pretty well, and I wonder if it's due to how they execute the actual plan. Like obviously you're limited on resources, correct? But I guess the big issue comes with an explosion Come to think about it, as I start to talk about it, I was going to say it would come from an explosion of health concerns, right? If a lot of your population had a lot of health issues, then you would need more and more resources to supply it. So maybe Canada's approach had a little bit to do with their actual diet system and their foods that they eat, as well as maybe they had less health issues to deal with at that time, or maybe they, like Chick-fil-A, got a line. I don't know, but you know what I mean? That might have a lot to do with it. So it might be like trying to integrate that into a country that's so disorganized and running out of resources just to cover meat's end, maybe is impossible to implement. Maybe you have to start almost from scratch and try to build your way up, or you would need an incredible amount of resources to try to implement that at that point.
Well, there comes a tipping point, and that kind of goes back to what I was saying. People don't understand the systems that operate now. Most economies are actually mixed economies, even in China. Now, there's certain obvious extreme versions of, or more or less extreme versions of specific applications of things, like China's really, and this is where the whole like runaway capitalism is neurotic state-run capitalism. Like where if you're a military general and you retire from the military and you start your own company, then the government blesses you, you can become a billionaire overnight. In America, that's less prevalent, but it is starting to happen.
That just happened to a dude in China.
Jack Ma.
I'm thinking of
Alibaba Group.
No, it was like Shen Zhao Zhao or Zhao Shen.
Another one.
$96 billion at the beginning to current day.
Oh.
Overnight. Now, what's interesting is that when you look him up, he's a water bottle. He's like owner of a water bottle company, but he's also linked to pharmaceutical companies. But he made $96 billion. He went from not being a billionaire to a $96 billionaire in 1 year. Literally, just watch this whole graph depicting the exchanges within wealth, which is incredible. They said something along the lines of like $2 trillion were distributed between each other. Wow, the rest of the world's going fucking broke.
Well, yeah, so that's capturing. Well, this goes back to we're talking about phone manufacturing. That's capturing the value that you saved, or the money you saved by lower wage labor, but keeping that price artificially high, and then just taking the rest of those profits and then giving them to the COO, the CTO, all the corporate office people, and those that are connected, the lobbyist firms and all that. When it comes to healthcare in Canada, there have been several repeals of their socialized system, and there are also more private options that exist up there now than before. Canada has also undergone quite a bit of a change since the 80s as well. There's a lot of Koreans, a lot of Africans, like there's
Muslim, huge.
There's
especially around Ontario.
Well, and you want to talk about like kind of going back to the whole slave labor thing, like NAFTA and CAFTA and the Trans-Pacific Partnership and all that kind of stuff. Canada had their own version, and they brought a whole bunch of Chinese people over to build like the railway system there, and so that's one of the reasons why they had like an explosion of Asians in Canada, and a lot of them just, rightfully so, just decided to stay. Whenever the job ended, or while they were working, they applied for
that was
the green
during
card
the
or
railroads, right?
Yeah,
during the explosion of the railroads.
No, so that's going to be. Are you talking like time period like American 1800s railroads? Or
yeah. Because of the propaganda that came out, because of the immigration, we needed the immigration to come into the country. We needed all these different people to come in.
No, these are for modern rail systems.
Gotcha. I thought you were referring to the migration into Canada with a time range onto that.
No, these are national infrastructure projects that Canada, in order to save money, kind of like our H-1B visa system here, will import certain types of labor to save money or give companies tax credits, which are anti-competitive in nature. Sort of like picking and choosing winners and losers. So Canada did that with some national infrastructure upgrades, and China's doing that as well. I think some of the Middle Eastern countries, I can't remember them off the top of my head, and other countries like Macedonia and Albania are using Asian, like Chinese and Vietnamese labor, because China wants to develop those countries. So not only are they providing the labor, they're offering loans, and they're offering loans knowing these companies won't be able to repay them, and then so they'll say, oh, well, we're just going to have land rights then in your country, with no restrictions. So they're putting themselves in a win-win situation. So that's how some of that national business works. And when it comes to healthcare, I know there's always been a system that has existed where if you were to pay cash for private systems, private healthcare systems, you could receive care sooner instead of having to wait. That's always been there, but people, and sometimes it takes generations to change. People have, to some degree, seen the writing on the wall and have realized that the nationalized healthcare approach, at least to some degree, is wrong or not as economically efficient as what people thought it would have been. And that's what happens whenever a government seizes capital, because they'll either maintain that momentum of production but not adjust it. But as we know, industries change. So if it's a government and they're not changing with the industry like a private company would, then they're going to essentially, through taxation, suffer the citizens, and suffer being they're misspending money, or they're spending money on outdated systems that ought not to be anymore.
7 Middle Eastern countries listed. I mean, point blank right there.
It's and it's tricky, and that's one of the reasons why I'm not a fan of subsidies to begin with. Like a good example of Solyndra is like hundreds of millions of dollars in federal subsidies for the solar production company that former President Obama loved, but then they went under. So who pays the bill? The citizens. So it's added to the national debt. Now you don't feel this thing personally, but it adds to the national debt. But now we're at the point of it's like 105%. Debt to GDP ratio.
You know what would be really nice? What would be really nice is just like how the defense budget mysteriously increases every year. What if our debt just mysteriously decreases every year? So like, hey guys, turns out this year we only owe $1 trillion to countries.
But it's impossible. It's impossible because off of a fiat currency based system, if I lend you that $1 and I say, okay, now you're going to pay me back with 1% interest. Now I'm going to have to print a second dollar so you can pay me back the first dollar at 1% interest.
What's funny is when you try to do that on a LLC attempt, it's called extortion, but when you do it as a company, it's
totally okay.
It's totally okay.
Yeah.
You know, I heard that companies can, I'm not sure if it's true anymore, but I know at least in like 2015 it was, companies can identify as a single entity, and that goes for taxes as well. How the fuck is that allowed?
It's just words. It's just because laws use static language. It's not adaptive. To adapt it, you have to reprint it, and it has to pass committee. All you have to do is just change words. And then make a legal argument in support or not in support of a certain thing. So plastic cups are illegal, right? Great. Let's use glass instead. Still holds the same.
It's so ironic that we're reverting back from the 1900s. Have you ever seen like the advertisements for throwaway plastic utensils?
Well, yeah, that's
where women started shaving. That's why they started shaving, because there was a company of razors that was trying to market towards women. So they would advertise women with these clean shaved armpits and legs.
That was, I think, Bic.
And it was disposable, so you can get rid of it and hide the evidence when you're done.
I think it was Bic.
It could very well likely be Bic. That seems like one of those companies could exist for a long time.
And that was a German company that's been around for a century now.
But this whole almost world, I mean, there's some countries and some people, but honestly, I would say overall, well, actually, that's so not true. I would say the majority of the first world countries all have adopted this smooth version of a woman. And what's really ironic is this just started in the 1900s because of a throwaway plastic company, because of the revolution of how they were able to make plastics.
It's also lifestyles. It's like I still have facial hair, but I don't need it. The same thing with like your eyebrows and all that. It was designed to prevent foreign intrusion of objects.
But you never hear like Shakespeare writing about girls with hairy legs. You know what I mean? That's the most interesting part, is you never hear about it in scripture almost anywhere. So it's like, we didn't give a fuck that girls had hairy legs forever. We never cared. Hairy armpits, nothing. So it was literally the 1900s established like a society implication of how you should look, and that spread across the world. And now you got like these new modern day hippies who are like, oh, I don't shave my legs now. I'm binary neutral. I don't go for that. It's like, I get you, but which angle are we hitting this from? Are we hitting this from the before the 1900s angle? Are we hitting this at the modern day? Are we going back? Are we going forward? I don't know which one.
It's like bell bottoms and high-waisted jeans are coming back.
Yeah, you see fashion nowadays. It's pretty much worse than the fucking 90s ever was.
Well, we have more alternative styles nowadays because there's more, there's less, I guess, homogeneous or homogenized thought processes.
It's like primary colors.
And it's funny. Yeah, we have more seemingly divergent and unique thought processes, even though it's really not.
Yeah.
Because a lot of it's still nowadays, I think, with the overall lack of intelligence in society, it's difficult to quantify truly unique ideas and personalities.
Well, even given that statement alone, is there such a thing? Because that's up for debate, ain't it? The theory of free will. Because I've heard it well explained in the idea that everything and every idea you have is not really your own idea, because you had to be taught it or you had to be told it. So you're really
behavior.
Yeah, you're just kind of a collection of what you picked and chose, what you heard, but you're really not ever creating a unique sense, a unique experience, a unique job. You're kind of playing into that role. Now, I think a lot of people get upset when you start to talk about something like that, because they're like, oh, I got free will. I'm like, I don't think it fucking matters, to be honest with you, whether you do or don't, because you really won't notice the difference regardless. So you can avoid that whole topic altogether. But that is one of the questions that they always do state, is that free will may not be 100% correct. But I think that was due to a test they did where they checked the electrical impulses inside the brains of a person, and they gave them a question, and their response triggered in their brain before they actually said the word. Now, if I'm reading that, I'm just going to say, well, obviously, because that's the speed at which the neuron was able to create the actual idea and then turn on the motor system to be able to make you vocalize it. But they seem to be pushing more that the difference was so latent that these parts of the brain were activated before the thought actually occurred in what they believed to be the thought process centers. I think in the end, it doesn't really matter.
I don't know if it matters or not. I think with the amount of people that we have on Earth now, a lot of this stuff can be totally predictable. We get people always want to pretend that it'll be different this time. And it's really not. Like
you ever wonder like how Socrates and Plato talked? Like, we like to think in our head this golden shining sun down on them. They got these gorgeous beards. There's these, like, you know what I mean? We think about it in a very like cinematic type of way. But do you ever wonder if he would be more comparable to like a dude you met at a gas station? You know what I mean? Like in the reality of this sense, we think we're a lot more evolved and a lot more intelligent than we are, but I really do wonder if that's the case. I mean, obviously we have the ability to understand things a lot easier because of the spread of information, but I think the processing in our brains and our communications may have been pretty much the same. But there is that interesting thing where they talked about there is a theory, well, I guess it's less of a theory because it's unprovable. It's more of an idea that when back before everyone was educated and there was no separation of church and state, the people who ran the church were actually taught how to read. So were nobles and so was the king. But for the majority of the people, they did not know how to read.
Just to be clear, this wasn't America. This was
yes, England,
Italy,
everywhere else.
Rome,
yeah. And they actually wonder. It's not so much that they think, but they wonder if that these people were renowned as saints and kind of followed religiously and blindly because the ability to be able to read a book in their head. and be able to tell you what it says. They think that this could have been a form of synesthesia that humans didn't naturally have, but then developed as time went along. Kind of like how we talk now, how we have different sounds that we just interpret into words and ideas and thoughts. They said that there might very well have been the creation of synesthetic-like properties from the saints reading out of the books that then translated into everybody once the education became big enough, but it wasn't an ingrained skill.
Yes, you're not wrong.
It's a cool idea.
Well, an IQ's a funny argument because whenever you take an intelligence quotient exam,
I never agreed with those either.
And I don't really either because it's a rather obnoxious assumption.
Yeah,
because
that your capacity equals the
the test itself seems to assume that it knows everything that can ever be known.
And it's a lot to do with sound and memory, which I would not actually give. Like, you could have an idiot savant, you know what I mean? Where they are non-verbal autistic and they can still do those things perfectly, if not better.
But when it comes to language, and I bring up IQ for a reason, it's more correlative than causality. Like certain tribes, why do they stay tribal? In the Amazon, there's certain languages that don't even use
similar
quantification or numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And
like the classic, one.
It's like
there's no relation to any
like
language.
You've caught 3 fish. How do you tell somebody without using numbers that you caught 3 fish? So when it comes to language, there's got to be some sort of correlation of like an expanded vocabulary or multilingual people, and some
similar to the pentatonic scale, like an ingrained, at least searching for patterns within behaviors. We got to have a baseline to a degree, but then there's these languages that are completely divergent, that have no similarities to these widespread languages that seem to mirror.
Well, if you notice, it tends to be primitive language, primitive people.
Yeah.
Like the Aboriginal or the Aborigines in Australia.
And I don't know a whole lot about them.
It's not to say they're complete. It's not to say they're complete idiots, but it's like it's total rehabilitation whenever somebody's learned a linguistic structure their entire life, and now you're having to relearn structures, like especially if numbers.
Yeah, you need a generational gap of the people who learned, and then learned to then be able to teach the modern.
And then it becomes an entirely new thing in and of itself.
And then they're trying to catch up to that point.
There was and I bring up the Amazonians because
Jeff Bezos.
No, there was a man who came across this tribe, and now he spent basically his entire life with this tribe, like 3/4 of it, and he's been trying to ever since he came across him. This guy's in his 60s. He's still trying to teach them what numbers are. Like, you have fish, but how many fish do you have?
Yeah.
And somehow in their language they can quantify they have multiple fish, but it's not using numbers, which is the weirdest thing. And it's not mentioned in plurality either, as we know plurals.
Yeah. So it's like almost non-binary.
It is the weirdest thing, and it's like then you have other societies that pay with rocks.
Yeah. Well, I mean, fuck. We used to fight wars for salt and spice. And that's just because food tastes like shit without it.
And aluminum used to be worth more than gold.
You know, have you seen that video of that dude and that girl who, I think it's old. It's colored, but it's not good quality. I'm going to say it's probably the 1980s, 1990s. But they ended up going to like some tribe that's never been contacted. At least that's what the video claims. And it's cool because the guy narrates over it, but he talks about how at first they think they're like ghosts. But they speak a similar French language. And that's what they assume they spoke. So they're able to understand bits and parts because it's a derivative of the language that they actually speak.
Quebecois French and Metropolitan French.
Yeah. So that's weird of it fucking self that they've never contacted each other, but they're both able to communicate just because of hundreds of years of lineation and just the success of this civilization outdating them. But they showed up and they were like thinking they were ghosts at first till the dude fell crossing the bridge. And then they just assumed, well, ghosts wouldn't fall. You know, they just levitate. So then they were like, okay. And it's really cool because it's like it takes like an hour for them to warm up to them. Like they're like like that. And it's really cool to see because they're obviously like African, you know what I mean? They got completely different hair, completely different skin, completely everything. So they're looking at their hair, they're looking at their skin, and it's like this really, really, really weird moment. I'm like, this is like an alien landing and just trying to touch you. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's what this is. That's exactly what this moment is. These people are having an alien experience right now. And that's such a crazy thought to me. But like you were saying about how they were trying to teach them numbers, it's a little bit different what I'm going to compare it to. But they gave him a spoon, and the dude put it on his head. And this really started a huge scientific study where the implications of ergonomics of a device does not imply its intuitive nature.
Yeah.
So it was like very interesting. I've actually been talking about this with other people more recently, and I've been trying to apply this to modern day people, and it's on my quest to try to understand how people are so very different from each other and how certain people are able to solve every problem they come across and able to handle their stress, while other people need you to walk them through every single thing. And so I started thinking about it, and I think it really does have to do with probably these types of factors, something similar to these. My overall assumption was a disrespect for authority makes good problem solvers and good stress managers.
Yeah, because
Now, not a whole lot, but just that fine line where
Yeah.
you've clearly been lied to and you've had to learn yourself.
Mhm.
So you have that ability to make your own decisions and make your own calls and actually quantify the outcome, good or bad, and make the decision upon it. And I was trying to think, why does this exist in some people and not exist in other people? And the thing that I came down to is more than likely they've never been in an environment that actually challenged them to create that gene to make it capable for them to use easily. It's a learning process.
Well, that's like ultimate authoritarianism. The reason why ultimate authoritarians do not want people to be educated is because they don't want any resistance.
Mm-hmm.
So what
Like
you're
the
saying to
Stalin
some
quote.
degree is true, which is funny because if you look at a place like North Korea that's been so closed off for so long, there are generations of people there now, multiple, that still have a disdain for the government because they know still, like in their heart, something is not right.
Well, there's a lot of escapees that
yeah.
escape to South Korea, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of videos on YouTube now of those people. And they say that the people in North Korea are great people, and they're just in a horrible, horrible living environment.
Yeah, I totally agree with that overall.
And that's so shitty because when you go to war with a country, you're not going to war. You're going to war because your boss told you to fight that boss.
Yeah,
that's it. And the
it
people
sucks.
are the same.
Yeah.
Like, that's the worst part about war is you don't get the choice. You know what I mean? You're forced into it. Like, why are we killing? I mean, I didn't realize Muhammad Ali had such a political position during his boxing, and it was all because of the Vietnam War, because he got drafted for the Vietnam War, and he said something like, Vietnam never did nothing to me.
So here's something interesting in remarks of primitivity. Did you know that some civilizations have more names for the colors? And they learn how to distinguish the colors in a better way. Like mauve
I could see that.
or purple.
Yeah.
Or
I could see that. I could see that. Just more
green, hunter green, navy green.
specifying.
Yeah. We have different levels of specificity as well. But it's true. But you were just talking about like primary colors earlier, RGB or even CMYK.
Well, it seems like that seems to be the pattern for just evolution as itself, evolution of everything. I mean, it starts with very, very basic primary like building blocks and then exemplifies on itself. I mean, literally not the theory, but Fibonacci sequence of itself is what I see an example of everything. And that's a very interesting way to connect that to what we're experiencing right now in current civilization, because you could really apply that, right? You need exponential growth to match the evolution of the society, the people, and the mold of the environment. And if you don't, you start to get the collapse that occurs when you start ignoring social issues and etc. So it's a very, very interesting thing that all of these, every single application or every single thing that exists in the universe has to follow this exponential growth or compromise to failure.
Well, that's what the Social Security method was based off of, an infinite growth model. And that's the other problem with government is like an infinite growth model. Now we see an extreme shift from the government to propagandize, instead of extreme growth, extreme cutback to compensate for that. the argument of finite resources, which to some degree they're not wrong. But it comes at the expense of totalitarianism and control instead of installing collective morality and understanding.
So I had a weird thought about this. I was thinking about this the other day. I was thinking about longevity's sake, because we're dealing with a pandemic right now, right?
We always are, but
we always
this
are.
one made the news.
Yeah. But if there was one that was worse than this, if there was one that was exponentially worse than this,
a real one.
Yeah. I started thinking about like the longevity of human society. How would you guarantee the success and the continuation of humans? And the thought occurred to me that more than likely you couldn't keep them all on one planet. Longevity-wise, you would have to create separate planets of separate colonies of people in case one had an outbreak of something.
It's indemnity. It's an insurance policy.
So, like, we're going to go from this weird path of being these nomads, literally nomads, to tribal primates, to closer to civilized, tribal, to then civilized, coming closer together. Now, in modern-day civilization, you can have 400 people living in your same exact complex, but you'll never see a motherfucker a day in your life.
Yeah.
So, we're together, but now we're separated. But we're more together because now there's towns, now there's cities, now there's countries, now there's continents.
All
you know what I
together
mean?
separate.
So then when we go to space, the next step is going to be separation, but it's going to be unity on top of separation. So it's this weird pattern that goes back and forth between each other through the growth cycles. And it's just a really cool thought that I had. And I was thinking, like, man, that's really going to complicate shit. Because how easy is it going to be for one of those planets or one of those colonies to just reject the current government and become their own human government? And then we got like 17 different factions of humans living in space when we were supposed to be one fucking species. That's going to happen.
Well,
isn't that inevitable?
But that's also ultimate freedom too.
It is. But it's a weird compromise.
That reminds me of like the Articles of Articles of Integration, Articles of Confederation. I want to say Articles of Integration.
I thought you were going to say Endor.
Pre-Constitution, where states originally were to function with more autonomy than what they have, and actually resemble individual countries instead of states. But we were just like all tied together under a philosophical unity of freedom and non-intervention. Now that's obviously been hijacked. But if we were to colonize space, I inherently wouldn't see anything wrong with the state of Pluto being completely
separated.
Different. Yeah, if it wanted to annex itself and have those freedoms because it sees wrongdoing. If it wants to annex itself or cut itself off from the state of Jupiter or the state of Mars or the country of Jupiter, country of Mars, it should be more than free to do so. Because that's the whole, like, you shall conform.
I agree, but does that mean that war is inevitably never ending for the human species?
I mean, if everyone adopted the non-aggression principle, then it would be true that we would never have a war again, but not.
Because it's a matter of time before it's interstellar. It's a matter of time before we're with other alien colonies.
Space Mars.
Yeah, so we're going to have situations where this division, this faction of humans, are fighting this faction of humans who are being assisted by this faction of aliens that are also working with this set of aliens that are being assisted with this set of aliens. I don't think we got a chance of really winning.
No, it's the same. It's the same things, but a different day, a different year, different.
Because we all have
century.
this idea of like a utopia future. You know what I mean? We think it's inevitable that we'll reach this sexless, genderless, cloning form. But I wonder if that's like not necessary.
But that's also a rather nihilistic approach. It actually denies true thought process and true diversity.
Yeah.
As well.
I think it's mostly tied to the failure of the male chromosome, but that kind of got shaken up when they found a bunch of women have the X chromosome as well.
But isn't it recessive?
I don't know about that, but I do know that it was a big breakthrough that women were being found with the X, because women predominantly have the YY and men have XY, but they were finding a bunch of women with the X chromosome. Now I don't know if it was XYY or XY, but that is quite a stir up. So I think that had a huge prediction, because they were looking at the numbers of men populations within the country to women populations. Obviously it varied based on the country, but mostly for the US, we were in a rapid decline from the 90s to essentially 2015, and then it kind of paused for the most part. But what is going up is male suicides. Have you looked into that?
Well, the rate of suicidality is always
1.25% per year higher.
But men have always have been a disproportionate representation of suicidality because we typically work more, we have more to lose, society doesn't comfort us as well or as easily.
Well, that's really coming out now. Like, it's a very fine line to talk about stuff like that because you don't want to offend anybody, and nobody's saying that nobody's equal to anybody else. But what we're saying is
you've got to have important conversations.
Yeah, there's it's really, I'm really starting to see all these things come out, these studies and these writings that are talking about men suffer in silence.
Yeah.
And I think as we're approaching true equality between just genders alone, we're starting to learn a lot about what's fucked up with each of us. We're starting to learn what's fucked up with women, what's fucked up with men, our similarities and our differences. And our differences are probably going to unify us more than anything in the end. I think that with the growth of technology, the more you got to work, I mean, compared to back in the day, you imagine them working a lot, but the amount of work you had to put in for the actual output was very, very minimal compared to what we do today. We got to work 40 minimum hours.
Well, it's increased diminishing returns because of overall instability psychologically and monetarily in the market. And our psychological market and our monetary economic market as well. Because it used to be that in simpler times, we can even go back to feudalism or
feudalism. I haven't heard that word in too long.
Or serfdom, whenever it was
serfs. SERF.
Yes, serfs and lords.
You're like jogging my memory from all that shit.
But it was a primitive
thief
time back then. You didn't need certain things to maintain certain things, so other things could be maintained.
Yeah.
Because they weren't built yet. So life was technically more simple.
Yeah.
Or primitive. So you had a small house. If you're lucky, you had a wood floor. A couple goats. Barter system.
That's a rich person too. Especially when you talk about serfdom.
Yeah.
Serfdom didn't have shit.
No.
And they had prima knock.
So
that's one thing you do learn in high school is a prima knock during the serfdom. You didn't want to be a serf.
No.
You wanted to be a peasant.
Yeah.
But what was interesting was the serfs were more protected than the peasants were because they were owned by a person.
Mm-hmm.
So they were way more protected, and a lot of people would buy their way into serfdom because it was a better way of living. Weird, fucked up way we used to live.
It's like a welfare state.
It's like the military. It's
more
like
than that. Well, yeah, like the modern military.
Jail just to get food.
Yeah, the modern military system is nothing but, I guess, a prototype system for mandatory employment, and then you get like reduced college or free college or whatever, and then if you stay in the path of the government, you have a cozier lifestyle. We already see that with the military too. They get better interest rates on home loans, car loans, credit cards, everything.
Yeah, everything
for life.
Mm-hmm. Even
if you just serve 2 years. So nowadays our quality of life is great. We have air conditioning, we have carpet, we can talk to strangers, but
porn.
it comes at a cost that people don't realize because they are so comfortable.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's what a lot of society is experiencing right now.
Well, and whenever our dollar was worth more too, and whenever women weren't working, and we were forced to be more economically humble because we all had a general stronger moral construct and realization of self-constraint and the consequences of our actions. We didn't purchase a house that was too big. We didn't purchase 3 cars. We didn't do all that kind of stuff. Now we do because
we were paid a lot more.
Yeah,
paid a lot more.
And whenever it comes to inflation-adjusted dollars, to some degree, we did get paid more. And then, so what happened as far as like economic booms go, 60s, 70s, 80s, we liberated women to some degree, and now they're joining the workforce, and so there's this extra money coming home. The government is now babysitting your child 8 hours a day, 5 days a week at school.
Mm-hmm.
So the wife is able to work maybe 20, 30 hours a week, 15 hours a week, whatever, which is 100% more than what she was just 20 years before that.
Yeah.
And so now the husband and wife realize that, we can buy a larger house.
Unless you're in a t-shirt factory.
And then after that, systems of debt came into play, where debt became easier and where the debt was more so the money than ever before. Even though we've almost exclusively been on a debt. Yeah. So now it's like, oh, well, we have all this extra money. We can balance it. We can create a perfect, or a good debt to income ratio system where we're making $10,000 a month and we're spending $5,000 a month in mortgage, credit card, streaming services. Well, not back then, but principle still applies. Going out for restaurants. So that was like also a big socialization boom, not socialism boom, but socialization boom. But then the chickens came home to roost a couple of times because people overextended themselves. And so there were scale backs for a lot of that kind of stuff. And then we saw that in 2008. But the funny thing is now, when it comes to debt and market instability, we have, what is it, like 20 some odd trillion, I can't even remember how many trillions of dollars of debt. So like 105% debt to GDP ratio. And we have more unfunded liabilities and promises to pay for services than we did in 2008, but yet still somehow everything's okay. It's all a lie. It's like 35 or 40% of all dollars in the history of the United States have been printed within the last year. That's quadrillions of dollars.
And then on top of that, you get the stimulus coming out. And all I'm thinking about
and that'll add more to it.
Germany.
Yeah. Weimar Republic.
It's crazy, but kind of to connect all these points, something I was thinking about. At least going back for the past 100 years, technically 120 at this point, there was all these civil rights or civil liberties being granted to lower treated classes of people right before war. Like the 1920s occurred, and that's when women started trying to protest. Not the 1920s, it was close to the 1930s, but they started protesting, women's suffrage movement. Teddy Roosevelt, I believe, was the president at the time.
Sounds right.
They arrested them because they were going to war with Germany. They arrested them for obstructing traffic in front of their protesting in front of D.C. So what ended up happening was they were force-fed, and that's the whole story about the one girl. I want to say Susan, but I'm not 100% sure. But she was force-fed in captivity because she did a hunger strike for the women's suffrage. Well, I don't really know. It gets a little muddy around when they got out and when they got the suffrage, but they ended up getting their rights eventually. I'm not sure if it was during or after World War I, but they did.
Well,
flash forward to World War II. What was happening right before World War II? You literally have blacks getting their own rights now. And what happens? Oh, now we're going to war, World War II. And this even happened with the Revolutionary War and the Civil War. We were like, hey, we don't care about anything. Just come fight for us and we'll give you freedom. After the Revolutionary War, nah, you guys are slaves because we're completely separated into city-states and we're divided amongst each other. But then when you have the Civil War, the exact same thing. They're like, hey, we'll give you your freedom if you fight. But a lot of them got back into indentured servitude because there was no jobs and no one hiring. And they had nothing else they could do. It was an easier living doing it that way. So when I see what's going on right now, all across the planet, I mean, think about it. It was just like 3 years ago we were watching the riots in Paris. And then we were watching Libya, and forsuit following would be Italy, etc. We've seen all these countries, and now America. All of us are rebelling against the governments. And at first I was just thinking it was going to be this country, but it seems like it's a worldwide unification. And it seems like everybody's trying to meet these civil liberty standards. And all I can think of is the past patterns of these civil liberties wanting to be passed through, and then what happens? We all go to fucking war.
Well, that's a principled argument of what
deunify, so that when you get drafted, you're not going to fight back.
Well, that's about positive rights and negative rights as well. So a lot of people are protesting, and this goes back again to what I was saying earlier. People don't realize what economic systems are and what certain words mean. When it came to the French Revolution, there was a French Revolution before the French Revolution, and it was a real revolution. Within the bourgeois class came into play, and then the newspapers were calling the poor people the underclass, the proletariat, which is kind of what we have now. So the proletariat during the Second French Revolution rose up and to some degree overthrew the government and created new laws. Well, the problem is the French Revolution that we know, that's always taught, that liberated the people, the entire argument was the freedom comes from the government. So all these laws were created under the notion that government grants freedom, that these freedoms aren't inherent. And that's what I see right now, like when it comes to LGBT rights, when it comes to banking, whenever it comes to automobiles, car insurance, all of these things. People don't realize that you're truly free with fewer laws, because the more laws you have, the more laws there are to break. But people are, some of them are malicious, but I think most of them are well-intended and altruistic in nature.
All these groups seem to be turning. Tell me that's not the fucking weirdest animal you've seen in your life.
It's pretty cute. And
it's the banded piglet squid. I had to pull up a picture of it because I took a screenshot earlier and I had to show you.
It threw me off big time.
Yo, do you see this thing?
I'm talking about the French Revolution.
I know. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to throw you off.
You're over here with Jigglypuff.
But yo, look at this fucking creature, dude. What the fuck is that thing? It's like a seal mixed with an octopus. It's got random tentacles that come off of its head.
Have you ever seen the, what's it called, the water bear?
The water bear, yeah, Targade. Yeah, I have. Yeah, those things are fucking weird, man.
Super cool.
You know what they say? They believe that the micro scale, the atomic level, applies to the macro scale of the universe as well. That there's these...
No.
Yeah. They believe that
one for the other, a correlation?
But it's kind of like what we were talking about before, about these growth expansions of keeping civilization alive. It's this weird patterns that take place as the expansion occurs, and they go back and forth between each other. I wonder if we could get to a certain point where we could like log all the information we have and then put it into a computer and then predict the outcomes of the future examples. I'm sure we can. I think we're only a few hundred years off of that, to be honest with you.
Well, that's what ASI and AGI attempt to do. So ASI and AGI are two different forms of artificial intelligence. AGI is artificial general, if I remember correctly, and then ASI is artificial super.
I got their insurance.
It's AIG. Hey. So we're not even like 1% to AGI.
Mm-hmm.
And AGI being a machine that learns how to build a house. ASI is to the point of like controlling movements and understanding movements of multiple billions of people around the world and creating economic and climatic models.
Like Batman. You know I'm talking about, the Christian Bale? I think it was the last Batman.
Oh wait, yeah,
where he's got the device that hooks up to the satellites all across the planet and gives actual sonar of the buildings and the people within it.
But that's more so like real-time reporting and algorithmic systems. We're talking about proactive.
I know, I'm derailing you.
Proactive models. And a good example of a proactive model would be Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
They want to be so efficient in delivering goods and services to you as a customer or even not a customer,
mm-hmm.
that they want an accuracy rate of 99.98%. And one of the reasons why they want such, or some of the reasons why they want such an accurate system is to reduce waste, and that's understandable, but because also margins are so thin. And that's one of the reasons why large companies exist.
Funding.
Squeezing margins.
Funding.
So if you're thinking about ordering those socks, and Amazon knows it's already been 6 months since you've ordered a pair of socks, they're just going to send those socks to your door anyway.
Yeah.
And if you don't return them, they credit your account, or they debit your account for them.
Yeah, and if you get a package and you say it didn't arrive, it doesn't matter anything. You will get that package again. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people have an issue with that. But it's actually like the reason they kind of got to where they are. That's the only thing that I can assume. I watched this like little tiny documentary, which of course was promoted through Jeff Bezos himself on it, and he talked about how customer obsession was his number one thing. But it's very incredible to see their growth from, just like 2000 to now. 2003. I mean, they were wearing brown, right? They were wearing brown back in the day. No one even remembers. That's the fucked up part. It was a brown fucking van with a yellow smile on it. Do you remember?
No.
It was like a tannish brown. Let me see.
Yeah, show me an OG.
And they were putting packages and mailboxes and everything.
And there's something to be said for new innovation. However, this is innovation at the expense of cornering markets and causing market stagnation and manipulating systems for their own gain. And that's an entirely wrong system, but the benefit of that entirely wrong system is you still receive your goods and services from it.
I don't know if I'm going to be able to. Apparently, this is more difficult to search up.
Well, there's that guy that's sort of like a military tan. Is that what you're thinking of?
Yeah, but the old Amazon trucks. It's so hard to find, man. You only got.
Oh, I invested in that company.
Rivian?
Yeah, I think they're based in Michigan.
So, you know what's very interesting? We'll just fuck off with the idea about whatever I was trying to look up. I'm not going to be able to find it. Maybe if I type like 2010. How about that? Because the color change happened about... Yeah, no, it's not going to happen.
That's a Chevy Silverado.
I'll find it later. I don't know what the fuck. Fuck, what were we just talking about? What was I just saying? Rivian, yeah. So I was talking to somebody and I was like, you know what I think their next move is going to be. Now, of course, this is just my ignorance to not even looking this up. This was just me making an assumption. And they'd be like, oh, look, I was right. It really had nothing to do with anything. But I told him, I was like, I think they're going to cut out the middleman and start making their own vehicles. And then I found out about Rivian. Mm-hmm. Rivian. And
there's a couple, but Rivian's one of the big ones.
And 2023 is when they have... at least scheduled for all of their vehicles being on the road. And when I saw that, I was like, oh shit, like that's exactly what they should have done. And so when I'm looking at Amazon, people talk about like, is Amazon going to take over the postal service? I think yes, but in a privatized way. I think that...
Well, which is what I want. But again, with Amazon, it comes at great expense of data mining and all this other...
It does. I think
very Orwellian stuff.
I think people are ready to get rid of it. I kind of played around with it. I know you are very, very, very against data mining, but when I went to go buy my Google products, I'm like, how many cameras do I have in my house? I was like, well, my computer, my phone. Mm-hmm. I was like, well, I have a router as well. And it's very easy to be able to do a sonar-like graph of just a router frequency within a room. Mm-hmm. Not only that, I was like, I'm uploading fucking videos to YouTube as a teenager. And I'm sitting here like, I don't want them to listen to me. I'm like, I'm already kind of giving up my privacy for those regards. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I got a washboard clean. I think that a washboard clean background, you know what I mean? In the sense that like, I don't think I have anything to hide. So I'm not worried about that. I know that really the fear is, like you were saying, where it's going to go, what it's going to be, and how they're going to have your insurance rates adjusted based on those. And they're already kind of trying to implement that with snapshots. And Uber. Did you know Uber implemented an AI technology at least 2 years ago that was able to predict if you were drunk or not when you were using Uber?
Interesting.
So that the driver would have the opportunity to reject the actual drive.
Interesting, because I was driving for...
That's data mining at its fucking finest.
Oh yeah, but I was driving 2 years ago and I never saw a system like that implemented, unless it was like...
Well, that could have been maybe when they started or wanting to implement it, but I know I've read about it 2 years ago.
It was probably in development and being slowly deployed.
Well, so here's the thing. Maybe it never even got implemented. So let me... Uber...
So, but there's some more to Amazon as well, and it comes in the form of politics and tax credits. And
especially with their last president. That's kind of crazy what we're watching. You know, with Jeff Bezos and Donald Trump, that was the closest that I was convinced that Skynet was going to occur. Because I started thinking about it, and I'm like, at what point do these companies have more power than the countries around them? And what point do they have more support and more backing than the countries behind them? And at what point do they have more power and capability because of the funding and the consumerism they're getting directly, not taking from?
New York Post 2018, 2 years ago.
Woo! My brain's working. Technically 3 now.
Yeah.
I'm just glad I got the time range. Look, I got approximate knowledge of everything, but I don't know exactly anything.
I only know half of everything.
So I got to take a piss. You want to take a piss break real quick?
No.
All right, we're going to take a pause break real quick.
Damn it, man.
Shit. I forgot which one's the pause button, which one's the play button. All right, we're back.
So as far as Amazon goes,
we don't got cut. We don't got to hop back in.
Oh no, but this is fascinating. So,
okay.
As far as Amazon goes, whenever it comes to the $15 wage that they implement, for the most part throughout the United States, and there's some payment fluctuation there, and the electric vehicles, there's a reason why they're doing that. So it's corporate welfare. If they can develop a green card, they can receive a whole bunch of subsidies to offset their tax burden.
Yeah, well, that's the funding. You're not going to make money by spending money. You're going to get paid the money to then make the thing.
Yeah, but it's corporate, and I don't get it. It's like people complain about China and all that kind of stuff, but like we're doing the same thing. We're using taxpayer money to subsidize the cost of large corporations.
Yeah, and we're funding the fuck out of them on deforesting
them up.
Yeah.
In the weirdest, most economically inefficient way possible, which is to take money from other people so they succeed.
Yep. Well, I mean, that's capitalism 101, though. I mean, I think capitalism only works for a set population with a certain amount of rights.
More so like
monopolizing.
It is monopolizing, but it's not. It's capitalism psychologically in the sense that they're going to do anything to get by. But as far as economic principles go, and the legislation that is implemented and how those laws are enacted and maintained is more like socialism or fascism, where you have large corporations that rub shoulders with politicians and lobby with politicians. That's one of the reasons why lobbying was originally unconstitutional. Is so that companies could not essentially to some degree pay off or write laws for the state legislator or the federal legislation, because if you're having a company write a law, it will eventually in some way be in favor of itself.
The person who you say yes to today is not who you say yes to 10 years from now.
And so Amazon is being proactive about wages because of the whole fight for 15 thing that's been going on for a long time. And what do we see now? A $15 minimum wage. Well, the thing is with the minimum wage now, if we have 35 to 40% of all dollars in the history of the United States being printed within the last year, yeah, you're going to get $15 an hour, but it's still going to have the purchasing power of $7 an hour.
And it's a restructuring of the entire work idea. So you're applying for a 40-hour week cycle where the days are not 40 hours and you're actually labor intensive versus the pay. But I think it's incredible. To be honest with you, I think it's doing a lot of good. Especially right now during the pandemic, I think that Amazon has really changed the world in allowing and creating jobs for people. And I think the amount of pay that they give people, I didn't realize how bad the pay was down here. And maybe it's just because I moved from Palm Coast. I've only really interacted with St. Augustine, Jacksonville, and then Daytona Beach. Maybe
Volusia County is some of, if not the lowest wages in the entire state of Florida.
Well, it was incredible because when I moved down here, man, first of all, backstory, I was supposed to work with my brother in his moving company, but he wasn't making even enough money to be able to pay me when he moved down here because the difference of the amount of people who move down here versus the amount of people who move in New York, and that's not stating people moving, that's stating coming to this country, and then state. There's so many more moving companies down here than ever were in New York that he literally had to scrape for money. So I couldn't work with him, and that really kind of threw a wrench into the whole circumstance.
Well, throwing a rocket would be rather destructive to the circumstance as well.
I like to up it up a little bit. You know what I mean? A wrench is a little overused, so I'm going
Michael
for a rocket. Then next is going to be a nuke. Like, hold on, that's hyperbole a little bit. But I had to my first job down here was Subway. And I had to commute 45 minutes. I had to ride a bike. I did not walk. I had to ride a bike 45 minutes. And in Florida, what you learn about Florida is you trade the snow for the rain, especially during the hurricane season. And that's when I started working. So I learned I had to bring a fucking second pair of clothes just to be able to dress into because I'm going to be soaking wet when I get to work.
In one of two ways, either from the rain or from
just riding the bike.
Yeah,
because the heat, what is it, heat table? Is incredibly higher. The humidity fucks with the oxygen level incredibly high. But that's a whole side note to begin with. I think it makes people a little bit stronger, though.
Well, most of Florida is regarded as a subtropical. Like once you go from Orlando south, it's like regarded as subtropical. So basically anything, it can grow.
Well, what I was saying was I worked at Subway and I got paid $9 an hour. And I worked there for about 6 months, and then I hopped up to this fruit stand. And I was working at this fruit stand for just 50 cents more. They advertise for $11 an hour, but when it comes down to it, it's $9.50, and I've already quit my fucking Subway job, so I'm working here now. You know what I mean? Now, what was really cool about that was the start time was 5 a.m. and the leave time was 8 p.m. So it was incredibly long days, and she had. And this is what people don't realize about the realistic nature of labor when you need a job. I was a fruit sorter that had to learn how to use a forklift, which I think is a benefit, but when you're looking at it on paper, that is not in my qualifications, and that should not be something that I am responsible for doing. Not that I can't do it, and it's not a benefit to my life, but on paper, that's a fucking insurance write-off right there. That's a problem. They would have me fucking paint the building. I painted the entire fucking building because she can do whatever she wants with me. So it got to the point where someone was like, you could make $13 an hour fucking painting for half the amount of time. And I'm like, fuck this. The last thing that pushed me over the edge for that job was she had some 12-foot long by 5-foot wide 4x4 tables that she wanted me to break down with a sledgehammer. Now look, every guy takes that challenge. But there's a huge difference once you go against a 4x4 fucking table. I went up and I swung that bitch as hard as I could, and it didn't do nothing. Nothing to nothing on it. Even the board that was on the top was at least 4 inches thick. So none of it was budging at all. At all. And then I started learning how to use like proper form because I just kept going at it. And I learned you had to put every fucking part of your body into that swing. Like from the tips of your toes to you clenching your dick just to swing that thing. And then,
well, that's a key. It's
it's your chi, you know what I mean? But long story short, I ended up quitting that job after 6 months to go hop up to 2 Men in a Truck. And I worked at 2 Men in a Truck, which was $13 an hour once you were a driver, $12 an hour if you were not a driver. And essentially you're driving 36-foot box trucks, and because they had no insurance, you had to pay for your own damages. So if you fucked anything up, which if you've ever moved anything, not everything makes it. Sometimes things are not meant to be moved, especially IKEA furniture and shit like that. That's meant to just be there. That's not meant to move anywhere.
It's a probability you're moving hundreds, if not thousands, of items.
Yep. And then people want it at the cheapest cost possible. They want the least amount of pay, so they're getting one truck. They're jamming everything in, and then you got the drivers paying for it, and that's fucking bullshit on a regard whole of itself. But then, so I've already been in Florida about a year and a half at this point, and this has been my experience. So then I hop up to, I think the last job I did after that was I went to Massey. And I was already living in Daytona Beach, so at the time going to 2 Men in a Truck, it was an hour and 15 minutes just to get a paycheck. And you know what? I wasn't even making enough to afford anything. Like I would just come straight home, down a beer, and just fucking sit there. Like I would literally just straight home, open the door, uniform, down a beer, slam it down. That was it. Because
but that's going to be the modern employee. You know, employment numbers, unemployment will be low, but it's just more jobs, menial jobs without value or sustainable income, and you're constantly grasping for straws.
You're grasping for straws, and I mean, not everybody grasps the same amount of time. Some of us get really lucky early. Some of us get really lucky late. And it's so interesting to look at because too much stress can really crush a person. How many times could you be in that circumstance? Like me hopping for just 50 cents to $1 more, to $1 more, working these fucking crazy jobs just to be able to pay for where I can live, then finally getting that place knowing I need to have a roommate just to be able to afford it. Now I'm working at this job called Massey. And that was slave labor. That was horrific. That was just 6 days a week. You had to call your customers on your day off. You'd work 32 lawns a day, ranging from 2,000 square foot to 150,000 square foot. And it was a commission-based job. But you better not get done before 5 p.m. because you're going to stay out there till 5 p.m. So when you get done at 2 o'clock, go sit in your car and sleep for 3 hours. That's what you legitimately would do. That job was horrific, but I was getting paid so much money that I could drop my roommate and I could live by myself. That's all fine and dandy, but I had all this money that I couldn't do anything with. So you know what I did? I bought that computer. I was like, this is the most amount of money I'm ever going to have. And I have lost my apartment twice. I've lost a car before. I've had to walk to work. I've had to get rides. I've had to live with Native Americans on their floor for a year. I'm going to spend this money. I'm never going to see this amount of money that I can just get rid of immediately. And what am I going to do? Hold it off so that I can go binge it at some other point in time? And I'm glad I did that decision. But isn't that funny that that type of thinking style only comes from hitting rock bottom that many times? And it's a really, really interesting thing to look at how much stress a person can handle and how much stress can shape character versus crush the person. And how so many of us have made it to a relatively mentally normal state and kept going compared to how much we've had to deal with. It's a very interesting line.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's something to say about people overall still being relatively normal and stable psychologically in society. It's like, I made a remark to my cousin. He was trying to run for, I believe, state senate in the out west, and he was complaining about the Capitol riots and so on and so forth. And first off, I'm a person of non-aggression principle, and then you have like those super MAGA rednecks that are like, oh, that's how the country was founded, Boston Tea Party and all that.
Mm.
I'm like, but that's not right either. That was a violent act, non-aggression principle. Now, out of bad things can come good things.
Yeah.
And that's how a lot of people are. But again, they don't realize, they just repeat what they're told. But whenever it comes to sanity in general, still, people are generally polite. I've read countless articles and watched countless videos of people like thoughts before and after visiting America, a perspective from a foreigner.
Mm-hmm.
And people will just wave at you or say hi to you, and they're like, well, in my country this would never happen. And how we're like generally polite whenever we ask how somebody is. We really don't care, we're just trying to be polite. Well, if you were to ask that like a Scandinavian country, it's like, how dare you, why are you being so nosy, what's going on?
Mm.
And that, it's like culture shock. But we're still relatively held together quite well. So
keeping it together pretty well for how much shit we deal with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, that also kind of leads into the realization that we're probably all insane.
No, I just think.
I mean,
that
it's a necessity, right? I mean, if we're going off of the quote, insanity is a sane reaction to an insane world. If we were to look at like a wild dog, like if you took the same species of dog, put them in the wild versus trying to raise them on your own, we got the right nutrition. We know the science to feed them, when to feed them, what to do with them, how to make them grow big and strong. And it's like, well, humans don't really have that because we're figuring that out ourselves. So it's almost like a necessary growth period that we're in.
There are insane moments of people do insane things. However, the collective or statistical whole of people doing insane things at the same time to cause a catastrophic outcome is relatively low.
And it's all relative to what you're considering insane. Of
Because
course, I'm referring to just the...
Most things are illogical, not insane.
Yeah, and I'm like kind of comparing it to like the Hollywood standard version. Like we were talking about Target today, there's always type A models that you'll never see working at your job. Mm-hmm. You'll never run into, you'll never talk to.
It's like Chick-fil-A. It's like very rarely have I met somebody that I didn't think, at least on the surface, was a beautiful person. Mm-hmm. Like even the guys there, they look good. Guys and women all the way around.
Wait, hold on. That was such an out of left field statement.
No, but it's true.
You're saying that all the people at Chick-fil-A are attractive?
In terms
compared to other fast food restaurants?
Yeah, for the most part. They tend to be more well dressed. They have better kempt hair. They have better smiles. The uniforms tend to be cleaner.
Higher control.
Now I've come across the anomaly for sure, but whenever it comes
it's just funny the way you put that.
Comes to overall quality and presentation, at least on the surface, things seem to be better. Yeah.
I think I would agree. I think that there's certain statistics that are unprovable, but you would have to agree with.
It was like American Eagle or Abercrombie and Fitch. They do the same thing. It's like, okay, now compare that with a Kmart employee.
Yeah. I was at Target today, man. I just looked around and I saw, like, with the face mask, it's a very unique experience to see people because it almost looked like the same person over and over and over. There was like 13 girls who walked in and they all looked pretty much the same.
Well, it's like it's all yoga pants. It's all like long, loose shirts with like tight yoga pants and tennis shoes.
Mm-hmm. And they all got the same style, the same face.
Well, for me, it was a good compare and contrast because just yesterday I was in a Walmart, and I haven't been inside a Walmart, with the exception of my grandparents for I haven't been inside a Walmart, specifically that Walmart, for like 2 years, because I avoid it. I hate them. It's
you lose like a little bit of your soul every time.
And it's the weirdest thing. It goes back to like the aisles. Like the aisles are 30 feet wide, but yet you're always running into somebody.
Yeah.
Whereas you go to Target, the aisles are 5 feet wide, but there's free movement. Like I don't understand it.
You know what it is? Here's my theory on it. It just clicked in my head. You know how like they say it's easier for you to get raped in a crowd of 1,000 people versus 100 people because of the anonymity amongst most people doing the solidarity. That's probably what it is in Walmart. You got a bigger building, you got a lot more people packed into that building, so because of that, they all kind of give up these manners that they're supposed to be playing a part of. Whereas Target, because it's so much smaller.
So Target's a mosh pit,
it's almost
Walmart's
like
a mosh pit, and Target's a symphony.
Yeah, it's almost like an environmental stress that causes the outcome.
But there are certain psychological and income-based correlations that you can make from or market demographics is what it's known as.
Try to grocery shop at Target versus Walmart. See how much the pricing is.
Oh, there's a huge price discrepancy on certain things.
Meats, healthy vegetables.
And that goes back to like branding and people like, oh, well, I paid more for this, so therefore it must be better. Well, your shopping experience may be better, but the product is still the same. It's that same box food that came from the same distribution center.
Same pesticides, same fertilizers, same soil.
Yeah.
Not getting much difference.
Yeah. Yep.
Have you ever heard about wasabi?
Horseradish.
Yes. So you know where I'm going. How like most wasabi that you get, especially the paste, is 99% horseradish.
People don't even know.
Yeah. Well, I found out about that like a few months ago. How about wasabi is so difficult to grow because of fungus, and they don't use fungicides on it or anything. So it's literally like if you plant 100, you might get 10 out of that. So it's so expensive as a commodity that I might be misquoting this, but I think it was something like $1,500 a pound of wasabi or something like that.
I would not be surprised. It'd be like truffle territory.
It's incredibly high. And when I looked at this, I believe it was like 2015 they started making more and more facilities to try to grow this, so maybe the price range has dipped since then.
Someone's trying to capitalize on scarcity.
Yes, exactly. Which is I think that's the most honest form of a pursuit.
Instead of closing down industries forcibly to prop yourself up.
Yeah. I think, but obviously you get complications once you reach the point of being the main consumer.
Yeah, you become that which you...
You become that, yes, and that's what we see happen with everything. Again, Skynet. I didn't even fucking watch that much of the Terminator. Not very big of a fan on it, but man, that idea of corporations becoming more powerful than the government seems way too real. Especially when we look at like Boston Dynamics, and then when we're looking at Amazon working with Rivian, and then you see Tesla replacing the semi-trucks. They have a semi-truck that apparently can get 65 miles to the fucking gallon. They're going to completely replace every single semi-truck on the planet. Now these, because it's Tesla, are going to UPS, are going to USPS, are going to US Foods. They're going to everybody because it's not held to one company specifically. Mm-hmm. So as I'm seeing this, and then I'm seeing Amazon on the other side using Rivian, obviously there's a very big dispute between Tesla and Amazon. So that being said, I could very easily see the most powerful corporations going to war against each other, or there being almost a similar form of organized crime as the mafia was.
I see it more so like what we see with the telecommunications industry right now. We have, at least in principle, the application will be totally different because logistics are dynamic and internet is relatively static. Communications, in terms of physical assets, like Comcast, Time Warner, all that, they have certain regions and they stay out of each other's regions. Now that's like the mafiaistic approach, where it's like Chicago thugs stay in Chicago, you don't ever go to New York, or if you do, you're buying your safety because you're just going there on vacation or something, but then you go back to your city. That's how I see a lot of these large corporations operating, like quasi-gentleman agreements between governments, where Amazon's going to have logistics and movies and all that kind of stuff, but then U.S. Foods will still be U.S. Foods and transport food, but they would also transport food for Amazon or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's happening with Walmart.
That's happening with almost every brick and mortar store.
I think it's good. Overall. I think that's what we kind of want the outcome to be. But it's like to what degree and what point, and when does reality cross the lines in black and white?
Well, and again, those profits translate into precipitously low wages for employees and increased profits for those at the top. Because now instead of, again, competitive systems, you have static systems. And you're now so being told what to buy. And so innovation is scarce, and any true innovation, other companies will just gobble up. Amazon has purchased companies seemingly irrelevant. Google has purchased a company seemingly irrelevant. I think Google owned Boston Dynamics at one time.
That'd be crazy.
I think they did at one time, and it was
Or was
recent,
it
within like the last couple of years it was sold.
Or maybe that was just like fan fiction.
No,
You know what I
think
mean?
I think it was an actual thing. Or the Alphabet Corporation, which was a corporate inversion for tax purposes. They own Boston Dynamics. So in the Alphabet Corporation, it's literally called the Alphabet, Google Alphabet. They own Google as well. So it was part of the Alphabet family. But I think the last couple of years that was
separated,
resold to Mitsubishi or Hyundai or some other company. But sometimes you purchase a company for what they have, not what they do. So whenever Google made the they're not even Pixels, they're the Nexus phones. Those are Motorola. And so Google bought out the Motorola Corporation, but the Motorola Corporation overall was failing as a whole, but they had patents. And so Google purchased Motorola for like $9 or $10 billion, and then a couple years later it sold it around $2 or $3 billion, but they kept all the patents. So that's what they were really getting after. Now they offered a product in between, a Google phone. I think it was a Nexus, or the name of the Google phones back then were called Nexus. But that wasn't their primary. Yeah. That wasn't their primary mode.
Yeah, wasn't the original Nokia?
The Dynatac.
Because it was the one with the Windows, essentially Windows 8, Windows 10 look, where it was all cubed.
Well, the original mobile cellular phones were Motorola, the Dynatac series. And so the colloquial name for that was called the Brick, and then it shrunk down, and then it shrunk 2 more times to like a foldable form factor. And then that's whenever Nokia came in and started taking over, and you saw Nokia being implemented in movies, kind of like how Audi was implemented in movies.
IBM.
For like their hipster cool, futuristic
Iron Man
looks.
2.
And the Will Smith movie about artificial intelligence. There was that movie, because that was like the
iRobot,
because that was like the Audi e-tron and all that, which that never really came to fruition. But the technology's been implemented. But e-tron is still a name, and it's still around, but it's not implemented like it is at Audi S4 or an R8 or something like that.
You know what was interesting about the movie iRobot?
It's based on a true story.
Well, some of the things they talked about, probably. Some of the things they talked about, we are just starting to understand about quantum science. Like there's this big theory about nanotubes, quantum nanotubes, which are these little structures within your cells that have quantum capabilities, or at least quantum interactions occur within these structures, and they're like nanotubes. They're like micro nanotubes. And what was interesting about iRobot was they were talking about the difference of that one robot versus the other robots was the density of his actual memory or whatever. And what's funny is they talk about the density of the cells actually creates these nanotubes that theoretically could have the quantum interactions. So they were almost like beating the same path before we even got there. I thought that was pretty interesting.
It is interesting. That would be a movie that I have not seen in years that I should watch again, just like I watched Artificial Intelligence. I think that'd be a movie, a good movie for you to watch. A future-based movie where wealthy people can make robots to serve the house, or artificial children, so if you can't have a child, you can make a child. Basically robotic gene selection, and you can just create whatever you want. And the little boy lives thousands and thousands of years to the point of where all human life ends, but aliens find him, and they're able to pick his computer brain and like learn the language and socio-economic systems and political systems, just because he had perfect memory because he was a robot. And they said, well, we were able to learn so much about your race, and the aliens are actually trying to revive
the human race,
which was pretty cool. So I would strongly recommend that. As far as like futurist movies go, there are some realistic applications.
I like shit like that, like the Prometheus. I thought that was cool, and the idea, not the execution, but it's a cool idea. I mean, it kind of just predates to panspermia. You know, that was one scientist legitimately said that like panspermia majority could only be supported by the idea of some super civilization sending out bacterium onto asteroids after the collapse of their planet. And nobody talked about that part of panspermia. But that was what he said was only the capability, or at least a planet that had a collection of bacteria that was advanced enough to be able to withstand space and then come into and then revive.
So, with Prometheus, I just rewatched the first one.
Mm-hmm.
I need to rewatch the second one.
There's two?
Yeah.
Prometheus?
Yeah. Because that's where you get like the alien creature and all that created Alien versus Predator.
No, I remember watching Prometheus. I don't think there was a second one, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because remember whenever the girl jettisons herself into space and she's like, I'm going to find out where we came from?
Yeah.
It picks up where that story ended in the first. But she, I can't tell you. Spoiler alerts.
I think you can.
I was about to big time.
I think you can. It's time. Do you ever watch the Predator series?
Yeah.
I love the Predator
there was
series.
Alien, there was Predator, there was Alien versus Predator, and there was all Ridley Scott. Yeah.
I
same
didn't.
with Prometheus.
I didn't really like the Aliens, but I liked the Predators. I thought those were really cool.
But if you watch Prometheus, you saw those characters near the end of the movie. So questions that I can ask about Prometheus because they weren't resolved in the second movie, if I remember correctly. What was the actual objective of creating of these other humanoids, creating Earth, if they just were intent on destroying it to begin with? That was something I didn't quite understand.
I believe there was two types of engineers. There was the engineers and then there was the people. And it was like the military grew too powerful and was fighting the actual people. So the military was trying to weaponize like the aliens and send them to other planets, and that's why they had the adaptability with the genetics of whatever species they get into, and that would have caused the metamorphosis of them. Mm-hmm. So I believe the original program was to be able to create new life, but it was militarized, and it was then used against their own people. And they show like all the engineers running and dying
in the hallway, the holograms.
Yeah, well, no, not even just that. Like there is a scene in there where they show the villagers, like the engineer villagers in their own city, and they're running, and they use their own weapons on each other. So it was the genetics were supposed to. It was like two different factions with two different plans. Yeah, because the whole creating the humans was a completely different program than creating the aliens. The aliens were a byproduct of this movement from the people rather than the military weaponizing it. And that's what it was the engineers didn't give a fuck about people. They were trying to weaponize this DNA altering substance. Whereas the engineers, the real engineers, the civilians, were trying to create new life and also continue on their genetics. Because if I recall, the whole idea was they were dying of like a plague or something like that. And the whole idea was to create these genetics to be able to revive their own, similar to hybridization. I could be missing some stuff there, but I believe that's what it was.
Well, that seems right.
Because I do know that there was the two factions that separated, and I do know that the aliens were weaponized. But I believe that the genetics for the people, because that was the whole thing, was they were like, why did they create the people? And so they went out, which that whole thing's fucking stupid. Do you really want to find the aliens that created you? And if we're going off of that timeline, they're not them. You know what I mean? Like just capability of interstellar travel. You're going to tell me by the time you have the capability to go find what you think might be the location of the creators of humans, that they're going to be there, that they're going to be the same people that made you, that they're not going to have different structures, different social capabilities, or they might not exist at all. That whole movie is kind of like Interstellar, you know what I mean? Where they kind of didn't think about the jump back, you know what I mean? That's the only issue I had with that more than anything was... But I mean, you gotta believe it for the movie. You know. Well,
that's like this. That's called suspension of disbelief.
Suspension of yep. Well, suspension of belief, because suspension of disbelief would be believing.
No, disbelief would be you're not believing it.
So would suspension of disbelief be believing or not?
Because it's almost like a double negative, right? So you're suspending something you don't believe in, so you can't believe something.
I'm wondering.
Fictitious. Yeah. So. Now that I know you haven't seen the second movie, I would advise that you watch that. That's pretty
So I looked it up, and I don't know that it exists. Is it maybe a different name or something?
Yeah, Alien Covenant.
Alien Covenant. Yeah, damn, you're right. No, because I remember Alien Covenant. That's why I didn't remember it. This is the one
because I redheaded
where they brain the robot, and the robot is identical to the other robot that they meet, and that robot ends up trying to kill them and get the girl pregnated with the alien again, right?
Well, yeah, it's so weird because it's like, why?
I totally forgot about that.
Why does this robot want to kill everything? I don't get it.
He had like a personality complex where he wasn't designed to have empathy. He was designed to have apathy because he was like a different version. He was the beginning versions, but he played a very good role. Like, he played very good as a psychopath.
Michael Fassbender, I believe.
I think that sounds right.
I think it was Michael Fassbender.
Now let's talk about the Predator.
And he's been pretty good actor overall.
Was he in Star Trek?
He's been in some other sci-fis, and I want to say an evil character or a bad character in, not Cumberbatch, in one of the Marvel series as well. Or
it's hard because we all know who we're confusing with that.
It's like misassociations all the
time.
Yeah.
Hold on. Yeah. Khan. His name was Khan in Star Trek. That's the guy we're confusing. So let me look up who Khan was in Star Trek.
And then do Michael Fassbender.
It was this guy. Okay. So he was not in Star Trek.
No, that's Cumberbatch.
Which
he played Doctor...
Who? Yeah.
Well, he played Doctor Who, but he also played the physician who ended up getting superpowers. He's a Marvel character.
Yeah, Doctor Strange.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I like Doctor Strange, but I also think the character is a little underdeveloped how they portray him, because he seems to have all these abilities and he seems to be very intelligent and very busy, but you never see any of that occur. You see a very modern person, especially when they made the Doctor Strange movies.
I did like the
Dark Marvels coming out, Dark Avengers.
That's racist.
I'm pretty hyped about it because they're talking about introducing Planet Hulk and Clue, which is Red Hulk.
Interesting.
Well, actually, no. I think Clue is Black and Red Hulk. I think Red Hulk is Red Hulk, exactly. But that's a little bit debatable.
I still want to see Marvel vs. Capcom the movie.
It will happen, right?
It has to.
It has to, right? I was just talking about this with Michael Pogue. I was like, there'll come a point. I was comparing it to Godzilla, right? Because first you got the Godzilla movie, where there's Godzilla destroying the city, right? And then they're like, well, we can turn this into a franchise. And then they got Godzilla fighting this monster, Godzilla fighting this monster. Well, you do that a certain amount of times, and you got just these monsters terrorizing these cities. And that's what the movie's around. And then you got Godzilla fighting those monsters or different versions. Yep. Where like even the King Kong series going separate. But then what do you have in the end? You got Godzilla, King of All Monsters, 1956 or current day, where you have to have them all fight. So I was like, this is kind of similar to like YouTube or the progression of everything. You have the very basic models, but eventually it's going to be all blurred together. So at a certain point in time, you're going to have every version of every single thing in a media form. So there's going to be like movies that are like DC versus Marvel. Then there's going to be like just these versions versus these.
But what if it's actually like Hollywood world, where somehow we can
change characters?
Have Guardians of the Galaxy meet up with Capcom or Spider-Man, and you can mix it in such a way that it still makes sense, because it's all fictional anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Because you've seen that with Guardians of the Galaxy. Like there was Guardians of the Galaxy is DC.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was some sort of Marvel amalgamation in one of the movies as well. I can't remember what it was.
You know what I just thought of? When that time comes, you know what the first implication is going to be? Creating your own protagonist. That's what it's totally going to be, dude.
Super protag.
Dude, just like how like more recent Halos do it, the cutscene where it's actually the model of your character, your suit, your color, your emblems, everything. They're going to have that in movies. That's going to be the first rendition of it. So you're going to have people fucking around making different characters and different movies, and that's going to be the beginning of that. And you know what I think is the next form of media? I don't think virtual reality is it. I think the next form of media that we're all really, really, really going to get hooked on is interactive holograms, where we sit in a room and dedicate that room to a hologram projector on the ceiling, and it's almost like being within the movie. And movies would be structured around that room and that environment itself.
Well, that's what Oculus is trying to achieve, or is attempting to achieve.
I think that's
you're just doing a same thing with different version.
Yeah, but I think the Oculus is like the canoe of the modern day boat, and I think that's the modern day boat.
Oh yeah.
And once that comes, that's going to change everything.
Well, and that's one of the reasons why Facebook owned Oculus, or still owns, if I remember correctly.
Really?
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
44 years now. It's to the point now. You had Oculus as a somewhat standalone company where you didn't need a Facebook account. But now to operate Oculus, you have to have a Facebook account. Well, if you're living on the internet, you're going to create a virtual city system, right? So you're going to have this thing on your face, and it's going to be like Sims meets Facebook meets VR. I think that's...
It's going to be like Second Life. You remember when that was hitting the news channels? It's going to be like Second Life. We're going to go through a whole new phase. And you know what? VR chat's almost there. VR chat's pretty much that. Have you seen VR chat? VR chat is this game, quote unquote, if you call it a game. And it's been out for a couple of years now, but essentially it's already like maps that people make or whatever that are already created. And obviously you can do a lot with these map makers to the point where you can pretty much recreate anything if you wanted to. And people who are using Oculus Rift usually have a computer capable of handling the actual the landscape generation. What's cool is you pick your own character, and if you have like the real Oculus, you can play on the computer as well. The difference between playing on the computer and playing with your actual Oculus is that there's full animation with the Oculus. So your character will move its body and do the positions to whatever you're doing. And you pick your character, you go in there, and then you just talk to people. And that's huge. That's gigantic. And that's already a thing. It's
so
like
those are
player.
lobbies.
Yeah, it's like it's literally a lobby. It's like a chat lobby.
Well, we've seen that with Dungeons and Dragons and EverQuest.
Yeah. And it's like Ready Player One, that movie. Just the beginning phases of that. And so I think we're totally going to get there. But I worry about distractions taking over. You know what I mean? Like, where's the line that we kind of draw and how much time we're giving away to other things? You know what I mean? I've kind of been feeling that a lot more recently, where I have to give this amount of time, which I like giving my time to my TV, you know what I mean, to my phone, whatever I do. But when I look at what I'm doing right now, I can't see much more room for anything else given my work schedule. You know what I mean? So it's like scary to think about consumerism outgrowing the actual quality of life, and then people just...
That's just like working to exist, because, you know, in the days of yore, you had more time. Well, we had less technology, so we were actually limited in things that we could have hobbies in, but you had more time to travel and do things. So like going to Europe was actually 6 months to a year or 2 years.
Yeah.
And then you came back.
If you survived.
Yeah. And that was vacation. Now, there was still class segregation back then for sure, but it was in a completely different context. You were more free to do some of the things that you wanted with less consequence. Nowadays, it's like, to travel, how are you going to travel? You're going to travel by car, or are you going to travel by airplane? Well, to travel by car, you need vehicle registration, you need insurance, you need a driver's license, right? Travel by airplane, well, how are you going to get there? Probably a vehicle, maybe your friend drops you off. So they've already went through those barriers. So maybe you don't need to drive a car, your friend could just drive you. Well, to travel internationally now, you have to have a passport. Well, that passport process takes multiple weeks to sometimes multiple months, depending upon how much you want to fast track the process. And then whenever you're there, now you have to have a COVID negative test within 72 hours. Oh wait, there's also do not fly list. Hope I'm not on one of those.
2-week quarantine. Yeah.
So it's levels of complexity designed to actually restrict.
Yeah, it's scary. It's scary to think about it. That's one of the biggest reasons that like I'm doing this podcast, man, is because I noticed a lot of failures in my own life that I was missing. You know, it's almost like echoes from my dad, where he would always talk about how he wanted a good family, he wanted close friends that came over for dinner every night, but the reality of the circumstance is that you don't have that time. You don't, and it's almost impossible to plan those things out. You can rarely, but you're giving up a lot of time for those moments.
And it's difficult to coordinate with people anyway nowadays. Quality time is quality of time. It happens through every socioeconomic rung on the ladder. But it seems to be the aspirational quality of time that people want, where they're having a nice dinner with friends and family, or they invite a dozen people to come over. It seems like that type of association after work are for lawyers and doctors, executives, things of that nature, where they make a grossly adjusted income of inflation or have multiple passive streams of income to where they can afford to do those things. That's not inherently negative on a case-by-case basis. However, whenever you apply it as a whole, and I've seen this because I've worked at places where a 2-bedroom condo goes for $750,000.
Yeah, with nothing fucking around.
Yeah.
New York.
Well, here. So, and they're all like the ex-wives of senators who own multiple properties in town where I live. A former officer of Merrill Lynch. Another lady, her husband worked in a Star Wars initiative in the Reagan administration. Another one is a former FBI agent, or CIA, sorry. Another one owns one of the largest cattle producers out in the Midwest. Another one was a psychologist, and her husband bought out businesses. Another one does land deals in New Jersey, but she was able to go to school and be an English teacher. So it's like those higher associations are typically reserved for people with other higher associations. Mm-hmm. Whereas us, let's go to a bar or a restaurant, and, spend an hour or two, complain, and then go back to our lives.
Yeah, and then realizing the recovery process from doing these things. Well, dude, I think this has been awesome. I think we've reached our end point. How are you feeling?
It's all right.
It's all right?
Not too bad.
I think this was a pretty good one, though. I'm going to have you on more based on your availability coming the school schedule.
If I end up going to school.
Hey, maybe not.
Make it till you fake it.
Make it fake. Yep. All right, man. Well, this was an awesome podcast. Like, with you, it's always like very, very interesting. It's like very easy to talk to, and it's very cool because you'll go and elaborate things where normal people really would just sit and listen, and that's why I like having you on here. And at first, I was wondering if we should like have some topics, but it's very clear that it's just a natural flowing situation that occurs, and I like that the most. So
the topic was no topic.
Yeah, the topic was no topic, and that seems to be the plan so far. So that's what I'm gonna keep doing.
Alrighty.
All right, man. Well, we're out of here, guys.
Christopher Columbus.
See ya.